Welcome back to Southeast Asia Radio. Today we'll be covering Alice Guo's arrest in Indonesia, Pope Francis's visit to the region, and flooding across Indonesia and Thailand.
We'll also discuss the sinkholes in Malaysia. I'm Lauren Mai.
And I'm Japhet and Lauren. Today is September 5th, 2024. Over the past few months, Thailand has been in political turmoil, recently culminating in the dissolution of the Move Forward Party and former Prime Minister Srettha Thaksin's removal from office. This week, Greg and Elina hosted Pongkwan PK Sawasdipakdi to talk through all the latest developments in Thailand. Before that, let's start with our headlines. To get us started, Alice Guo, the embattled former mayor of Bamban municipality in the Philippines, was arrested by Indonesian authorities in Tangerang, Indonesia on September 3rd.
Wow, so they finally caught her? She's been on the run for almost 2 months now.
Yeah, they did. So just a quick recap to everyone, Guo was being investigated for alleged links to Chinese criminal syndicates.
She was ordered to appear before the Philippine Senate to testify about her supposed involvement in the Philippine offshore gambling operator, or POGO industry.
She refused to show up, though, so the Senate issued her arrest warrant on July 13th, leading to her daring escape from the Philippines.
Guo and her siblings snuck out of the country by boat, arriving in Malaysia on July 18th. They traveled to Singapore 3 days later, then took a ferry to Indonesia on August 18th.
The director of the Philippine National Bureau of Information, Jaime Santiago, said that the authorities are hoping to take her back to Manila by September 5th, where she will face the Senate for questioning. Let's move on to our next story. Southeast Asia gets a visit from Pope Francis this week.
Okay, so where's he going and why?
His trip, based on a central message of acting on climate change, will take him to Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, and Singapore.
Over the course of 12 days, from September 2nd through the 13th, he'll travel roughly 20,000 miles.
Whew, that's a lot. So I can't imagine that would be particularly easy for him. He's 87 years old and typically needs a cane, walker, or wheelchair to get around. And this will be his longest trip ever as Pope.
That sounds difficult. He's chosen an interesting topic as well. Isn't he very passionate about climate change?
Yeah, I remember him being a big advocate for the 2015 Paris Accords.
He definitely picked the right place to talk about it. Southeast Asia is one of the world's most climate disaster vulnerable regions. It's also home to 2 of Asia's predominantly Catholic countries, the Philippines and Timor-Leste.
I wonder why he didn't visit the Philippines then.
Mostly because he's focusing on visiting countries where Catholics make up small minorities.
Good point. For example, only 3% of Indonesia's 280 million are Catholic. More than just recognizing smaller Catholic communities, Catholic-Muslim dialogue has also been a big priority for him. While he's in Indonesia, Pope Francis plans to take part in an interfaith meeting at Jakarta's Istiqlal Mosque.
That makes sense. I mean, he was the first pope to step foot on the Arabian Peninsula. At every stop, the pope will also hold meetings with local authorities, diplomats, and the Catholic community.
He'll also hold masses outside at each of these stops.
I'm interested to see what he'll have to say on climate change at these meetings and at these masses.
He's often urged his supporters to focus on people and communities most vulnerable to climate disasters.
Speaking of climate disasters, flooding has plagued the region over the last 2 weeks.
Yes, that's sadly correct. On August 25th, flooding in Indonesia's North Maluku province killed 13 people and injured 2 following heavy rains across the region.
Unfortunately, this is not Indonesia's first fatal flood this year. In May, Indonesia's West Sumatra province faced flash flooding and mudslides that killed over 60 people.
Indonesia's National Agency for Disaster Countermeasure, or BNPB, urged people to remain vigilant and follow directions from authorities on potential subsequent floods. In the meantime, they deployed an evacuation team to rescue victims.
We are certainly wishing Indonesia a safe recovery. Floods have also hit Thailand, killing over 20 people and injuring 19.
The flooding has been going on for weeks, impacting around 30,000 households and hitting the Chiang Rai and Sukhothai provinces the hardest.
The scariest part is that while flooding isn't an annual occurrence in parts of Thailand during the June to October monsoon season, Thailand has witnessed 1.8 times more rain than usual this month. Forecasters also predict that the rain will continue to worsen throughout September.
Oh, that's not good. Economists are also divided on the flooding's economic impact. While Interim Finance Minister Pichai Chunhavajira believes the flooding will not have an impact on Thailand's economic growth, some economists predict that its severity may be comparable to the country's devastating floods in 2011.
Not to mention the impacts on politics as well. The people's eyes are on Prime Minister Paetongtarn, who has been in office for less than a month. Paetongtarn has already made visits to the Nan province, handing out food supplies to impacted civilians.
Paetongtarn's decisions to make visits this early in the flooding stages are being seen as preventative measures to keep approval ratings high. In 2011, then Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawat's administration faced scrutiny for the slow response to the flooding, attributing the delays in reconstruction support to a slowed economic recovery.
Thankfully, Thailand seems to be generally better positioned towards flood recovery than they were 13 years ago, with Bangkok already taking measures to reinforce and increase the height of their flood walls along the Chao Phraya with sandbags to prevent further flooding.
We're certainly wishing Thailand a speedy recovery here as well. We're ending this week's headlines with, you guessed it, another natural disaster.
Yeah, unfortunately, this week has not been very kind to the region. On August 23rd, an 8-meter sinkhole opened up and swallowed a tourist in downtown Kuala Lumpur.
That's terrifying. While trying their best to rescue the tourist, authorities aren't optimistic. You see, when the sinkhole opened, a large concrete sewer at the bottom of the sinkhole was broken. Authorities are therefore speculating that the tourist may have fallen in and been swept away.
But somehow it gets worse. A second sinkhole appeared in Kuala Lumpur's Jalan Masjid, India, just 5 days later, and just 50 meters away from the first one.
Oh, that did happen, didn't it? The second sinkhole has reasonably generated public concerns regarding the safety of the area. But Deputy Prime Minister Fadullah Yusuf gave assurances that Jalan Masjid, India is still safe for the public, so long as they listen to the authorities and do not cross police lines.
Yes, hopefully their promised integrity audits can pinpoint the reason behind these sinkholes and that Malaysia's Fire and Rescue Department can locate the missing tourist. But that wraps up our headlines for today, so if we missed anything that you wanted to hear about, do write us at scaradio@csis.org and we'll get back to you.
Up next, Greg and Alina's conversation with PK. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Greg Poling with CSIS, joined yet again by co-host Elina Noor with the Carnegie Endowment. Hey, Elina.
Hey, Greg.
Elina, out of curiosity, do you listen to the episodes that you're not on?
Yeah, of course I do.
Good. So we said nothing but good things about you on
Absolutely.
the last episode.
Yes.
Perfect. Yes. We understand that you have important things to do and you weren't just gallivanting about at the beach or Universal Studios or whatever you were doing. And today, Elina and I are joined by a returning guest, Pongkwan Sawasdipakdi, who is a lecturer at Thammasat and also a non-resident fellow with our Southeast Asia program here at CSIS. PK, as known to friends, thanks so much for coming back on.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And since the last time we had PK on, you are now Dr. PK Sawasdipakdi. Congratulations on finishing that and permanently relocated back to Bangkok, right?
Yes.
So, not to give away the plot, but we have PK on to talk about the Westerosi-like Game of Thrones that's gone on in Thailand over the last month. The last time we talked Thailand, Elina and I spoke to Tidinan Pangsudarak, where we said that we thought we were going to see the Constitutional Court dissolve the Move Forward Party and probably oust Prime Minister Seta Thavisin from the Pheu Thai Party. That took longer than we thought, but unfortunately the predictions were accurate. So on August 7th, Thailand's Constitutional Court ordered the Move Forward Party to be dissolved. Those who were listening might remember last year, Move Forward won a plurality of the seats in Thailand's general election last year, but was unable to form a government. And then the government that was formed was this kind of unholy union between the old red and yellow factions, with Pheu Thai being able to appoint the Prime Minister Seta Thavisin. Seta was also ousted by the Constitutional Court on August 15th for ethics violations related to the appointment of a cabinet minister who had once been in jail. And then the coalition held, and Pheu Thai and his coalition was able to appoint Paetongtarn Shinawat, daughter of former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawat, and niece of former Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawat. So keeping it in the family. Paetongtarn's been Prime Minister for, 10 days? 2 weeks?
Not official yet, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
As of the time of recording, that is.
As of the time of recording, things are moving faster in Thailand than we can edit podcasts, I'm afraid. So why don't we just start with the broad question, PK? First thoughts, what do we make of this kind of chopping off of heads over the last months?
Yeah, I don't know. It's so hard to describe what's going on in Thailand in, I say 30 minutes or 30 seconds. I think power politics is coming back for sure. And now we can see the real location of who's siding with which faction and whatnot. And that's also because the main enemy of the establishment is becoming the Future Forward, the former Future Forward, the Move Forward, and now the People's Party, right? When the Red Shirt or Thai's party used to be the number one enemy of the establishment. So now there's a new coming enemy. So we see the realignment of people in politics. So that's first thing I think we're observing right now. But we also see the continuation of the old military regime, right? So whereas at the politicians level, they might want to like be in the coalition and, start running the country, we also see the constitutional court, which you can say it's like a machine of the old regime, is also trying to kick out people from the Thai party. So the conflict between the O establishment and Thai party is still there. There are also other people in the O establishment that's willing to switch sides as well. The People's Party is out of the question because there's on the other side of the aisle already. And I think the last thing that we're observing right now, as of today, is it's also a personal revenge of Thaksin as well, that trying to get the Democratic Party, the Thai Sang Thai Party, and what else? Palang Pracharat Party into different factions. So now we're seeing him destroying these three parties in action. So, yeah, I think they're multifaceted, and you can't actually really say who's on which side, because even within the same side, there are multiple layers of people at the top still wanting to stick to the anti-Thaksin agenda. But there are also people who are willing to join the government because they haven't been in the government for a long time, and being in the government allows them to be able to reap some benefits that they can pass on to their constituents.
I guess my really serious question to you, PK, is did you time your return to Bangkok for this especially? You just wanted to be in the thick of things, didn't you?
Yeah.
But let me pick up on your point about Thaksin. So Thaksin is back. He claims he is backing his daughter behind the scenes, but he gave this speech at a mall recently at Siam Paragon, right? And unveiled his 14-point plan. I mean, is he really just playing a supporting role to his daughter? His daughter has said, she's her own person and her father's just advising her. What's his real role here?
That's a very good question. I think he's really playing the role of a supporter. I mean, advisor to his daughter. At least that's the role that his daughter wants. And I think people that working in the party want. But also observing his personality in the past 20 years, right? He has like this sort of big personality. On the one hand, I think he really wants to play a supporting role. But on the other hand, he can't resist coming out and giving interviews to reporters, right? And also, because he's giving a lot of good quotes that the reporters can report, the reporters actually go to him for answers on stuff as well. So I think it's hard. He's going to be, I think, one of the most influential advisor. I think most of the ideas would probably come from him. Whether he can restrain his role or like at least try to not giving as many interviews as possible, that's who knows, right? Because people are also trying to stop him from doing that, but he cannot resist the urge to be in the public eyes.
I thought he wanted coffee for every piece of advice that he was giving. He must be getting lots of caffeine.
It's not good for a man his age.
Yeah. But I think he's also having like that DNA business that might actually help with his health or whatnot. Yeah.
He's one of those leaders who happens to be very sick when it's time to serve time and gets to do it from hospital, and then is suddenly very, very healthy when he gets amnesty. All right, let's stay salacious for a minute and keep psychoanalyzing the role of Thaksin. He also still faces a lèse majesté charge arising from another interview he gave. So as you said, maybe he should stop giving so many interviews. But how do we kind of make sense of how much the establishment, palace, business interests, and military have really accepted this idea that they need to be allied with Thaksin, if at least some of them are still trying to put him in prison and or ban him from politics for life under a lèse majesté charge for defaming the monarchy.
Well, there still remains a possibility for sure that he's going to be charged with lèse majesté and go back to although the charge is very weak, right? But in Thailand, claims don't have to be strong in order to be prosecuted. So there's a high possibility. Now, one thing that we don't know, and I also don't know, I don't have the answer for this, but there's also speculation or at least some rumor that there's some faction that disliking the Thaksin's faction that includes Seta for his role in assigning or dismissing people who work in either the police department or in the palace. So there are definitely people that don't like those moves and are trying to really penalize the current faction.
So, PK, Paetongtarn hasn't constituted her cabinet yet. But then there are these massive floods that are occurring right now in Thailand as well. Is she on autopilot mode right now and just addressing this emergency with the cabinet positions being negotiated and, a lot of pork barreling going on behind the scenes? Is that what's going on now?
Yes and no, in the sense that she's addressing it by going to the rural areas, the flooded areas, similarly to the opposition party leader, to the current People's Party leader. They're all going to the rural areas and the flooded areas. The problem is because the cabinet is not appointed yet, she cannot do anything at all. So that's in the constitution, right? When the cabinet and the government is not official, the prime minister and other people in the party cannot act as if they are the government, because otherwise it's risk contradicting or violating the constitution, which means there might actually be someone filing the claim to the constitutional court, which could get the government dismissed and ousted the prime minister again. So they're very careful on their move. They could go to the flooded area and visit them and do the performative action, like cooking meals for the victims of the flood, but they could not do anything beyond that. Anything beyond that, like the assistance and help needs to come from the bureaucratic system, but not the government right now. And that's because the constitution is setting up this way. It's been really hard for them to do anything. But you're also right. There's also another things going on in Bangkok, which is the negotiation of the cabinet members and things like that. And it seems like the attention is probably on the latter more than the former. But there's also another reason for why they can't act quickly on the former, which is the constitution that prevents it.
So when the court rulings came down this month, or even before the court ruling, I think everybody kind of suspected what they were going to be. There was a certain cynical shrugging of shoulders that said, this is just the cycle, the wheel turning again, another round of judicial coups. But something does seem a little different to me in that while Move Forward was disbanded, only the executive committee were banned from politics for 10 years, including former leader Pita Limjaroenrat, who had tried to become prime minister, which means that there's still kind of a somewhat loyal opposition, I suppose, operating within the parliament. 143, I think, Move Forward MPs still have their seats. And they've now all been allowed to rebrand under this new party, the People's Party, which will still be there. They'll continue to try as much as they can to hold the government to account. And then in the next election, they will presumably run. They will presumably win the most seats, maybe this time even a majority. That's certainly what they're aiming for. And the next time around, there won't be a military-appointed Senate to throw its weight behind another candidate, as happened last year. The establishment, capital E, the iron triangle of the palace and the military and the business conglomerates must know that. And yet it seems like they're a little back-footed. They understand that what happened last year with this groundswell of support for Move Forward was different. And they maybe can't just treat this the way they did the old red shirt movement under Thaksin and just entirely, toss the parties out. I don't know, am I being too Pollyannish in thinking that the size of Move Forward showing last year has given folks pause, or maybe there actually is some thinking in the establishment that we can't just keep throwing out popular parties every time they win elections?
I haven't heard about stopping throwing them out at all. I thought since last time, every time that dissolves, like Future Forward, move forward, and now People's Party, who knows what's gonna happen to them, right? I thought there's gonna realize that there's no way they're becoming weaker, right? Because like when you dissolve them, you risk making their supporters angry. And that's like a normal logic that we're actually, we hope that they would think like this. But I think and I'm now just guessing what they're thinking, right? But I think there's a possibility that they're thinking that after dissolving too many times, you're actually leaving the party weak with the members who really don't know how to execute their policies and even probably criticize the policies in the parliament. That's probably one hypothesis, right? The second hypothesis might be that some of them might actually think that if the current government can stay in power long enough and can execute all the populist policies that they promised to the people, the Thai party might be able to increase its popularity, and which means they could win the election in the next 3 years if this government can finish the term. Yeah.
I hadn't really put it together this way, but it is a little nutty to think that we have come to a point where Future Forward / Move Forward / the People's Party is such an existential threat to the powers that be that now their Hail Mary is to hope that Pheu Thai can win a majority of seats, or at least can win enough to form a governing coalition. Like, Pheu Thai is the savior of the establishment. That's how upside down politics have become in Bangkok.
Yeah. But also, if Pheu Thai becomes popular again, there's also reasonable to think that Pheu Thai will become the anti-establishment, and at least in the eyes of the establishment, think that Pheu Thai is anti-establishment and the enemy again. Right now, they're weak. That's why they're together. But if Pheu Thai can execute all these policy platforms and become stronger again, there's also possibility of them getting kicked out from the coalition, right? Or at least the old establishment trying to frame narratives that are anti-Pheu Thai again, right? And one of the speculation about why Seta was dismissed was also because of the digital wallet policy. And one of the reasons I've heard people talking about is, and also speculation, that every time Pheu Thai's party or the Thai party, when they had policy platforms that involved giving money to people that could increase their popularity, they're going to be penalized by the establishment. So I don't know if this is right, this is wrong. It's just like one of the speculations that I've been hearing people talking about.
Let's peel that policy onion a little further and see if it makes us cry. But it seems as though this digital wallet scheme is still in the works. What does that mean, given what you've just said, PK? Because in our last conversation about Thailand with Thitinan, he talked about how basically the Thai economy has been lagging given all this instability in domestic politics. If the Paetongtarn government insists on this digital wallet, is that a death knell for them?
Possible, because there are a lot of objection, but they really want to make this a policy platform for them to kick off the economy again, right? Which is also possible, but there's also lack of really evidence that supports it. I'm a bit on positive side that it could really kickstart. I mean, logically, if people can spend, right, and there are certain things that they can spend this on, this would actually, kick off the economy, right? The production will go up and things like that. But there are still a lot of problems with, I think, the implementation of it, right? Like, when can people actually get their cash back instead of, just working with the digital currency and keep spending on that? And people can use that to actually pay for electricity, water, things like that, right? There are a lot of technical confusion around it. Adding a layer to that, it also seems that the technocrats or bureaucrats, or at least the establishment, don't like this idea, right? They're facing a lot of obstacle from the central bank, which leads to a lot of adjustment of the scheme. And right now, it looks like because they can't settle on the scheme early enough, they have to turn into like a normal way of just giving out cash to vulnerable group of people. So like the lower income people will get that in terms of cash first, because now we're heading towards the end of the budgeting year. And they cannot wait until next year to basically just roll out the digital wallet scheme. So there are a lot of changes in the policy. And what I don't know, and I don't have information enough, is whether it actually comes from the lack of plan to implement it, or is it actually the problems and obstacles, objections that actually come within the coalition itself. Because it looks like for some reason they just really don't like when the Thai party given money to people, right? And there was also like definitely discussion about borrowing money would actually add more national debt and things like that, right? So that's something that I don't know, but the empirical evidence is it's being delayed and there are a lot of changes involved in the program because they couldn't settle on this program early enough to use the money within this budgeting period.
PK, from the perspective of the minority royalist and military-backed parties that are part of Pheu Thai's coalition, but are really, the ones holding the ultimate card here, how much does policy actually matter? When they ousted Thaksin, it wasn't because of policy. When they ousted Yingluck, they used the subsidy scheme for rice farmers as an excuse, but then they came into power and gave even larger subsidies to the rice farmers because they realized it was popular. I have to assume that if they decided to oust Paetongtarn, the Palang Pracharat-led coalition that followed would just go ahead and give an even bigger digital wallet to people to try to buy popularity. And I'm sure citizens know this, that none of this is about policy. It's about this palace intrigue and gossip and personality clashes that must be exhausting for the body politic who's just watched this telenovela for 30 years.
Yeah, but in a way, it's not very hard to guess, right? It's not really about policy, but it's about who's implementing that policy, right? The way I heard it is, well, if the establishment and the military faction implements this policy, it's all right, right? Because that's going to bring up their popularity and whatnot. But when it's not the establishment that implements such policy, which could lead to higher popularity, that's problematic. Because eventually the establishment doesn't want a competitor in the politics. So they can have as many, parties they want as long as they're not more popular than the current establishment and people don't start questioning the role of the military, the role of the higher force, right? But it looks like when one side become more popular or like the sides other than the establishment becoming popular, the focus of the people actually shift or actually they like those parties or those coalitions better, which is very detrimental to the popularity of the establishment.
I mean, where does this leave Thai democracy, PK? This is a question that I think we've asked all our guests on Thailand, but maybe you have a different answer.
I think we still have to fight for it. Some people are okay with the minimum definition of democracy, which is at least we're having an election right now. And it looks like we're going to have an election again in 2-3 years if nothing happens, right? But also what I can see, well, I'll try to be optimistic because I know that most people are not very optimistic about it. I think in the past few years, we're having a stronger civil rights movement, or all of these NGOs are becoming stronger, right? And they're now being invited to give their opinions inside the parliament, right? So at least their voices are being heard now. Let's talk about, ILAW. Let's talk about the Center of Human Rights Lawyers. I think they're becoming stronger. So at least if these organizations were stronger, it also means that they might, at least some of the voices are heard, right? And it's not just like purely power politics. However, there's still things that we have to keep talking about, keep fighting for. There still a bunch of people being held in jail because of the less majesté law and laws related to protest and public assembly. Most of them were prosecuted under the previous military regime and things like that. So it's a long way to go for democracy in Thailand if you actually need the definition of like formal election and also citizens' participation. But we have some agencies, some organizations that are becoming stronger and are willing to act and represent voices of people who are usually not heard. I think it's a step by step, but if you compare to like, I think 10, 20 years ago, these organizations didn't even exist, right? So if we're talking about organized mobilization, we didn't have that. We just had a group of people who just like felt compelled to come out to fight against the military coup and things like that. Now we have a more organized force. So I think even though people have pessimistic view about it, I think we have some improvement to be proud of.
We would normally end a conversation like this on some question about U.S.-Thai alliance and foreign policy, but frankly, I don't think it matters that much. It just reinforces in Washington's view that there's not a lot of engagement that can be done with Thailand beyond kind of the bare minimum pragmatic, because Thailand, despite some early hope last year, hasn't gotten its social contract back in order. I think where I'd like to end is, do we have any sense of what the Thai people make of all of this? Is there any polling or sentiment data to suggest if the events of the last months have further diminished support for Pheu Thai and for the military coalition? And maybe if you want to go even farther, if another election was held tomorrow, would the People's Party do even better than they did last year because of anger?
I think so, but that's about time horizon, right? If it's held tomorrow, maybe. But if you wait for 2-3 years and you allow this current coalition to, well, if it's not getting messier than this, right? And then if they could start to like really implement and execute something, maybe the anger is not as high as today, right? But also like go back to the question about polling and things like that. Yes, we see a slightly decreasing in terms of the confidence in the government, but there needs to be caution because we don't know how impartial those polls are in Thailand. And it's like we cannot really take it for granted, right? It also depends on which organization is running the polls. So it could be really biased towards one side or the other. My sense, this could be biased because my observation comes from talking to people around me, but also like Twitter. It seems like there is a strong division between, and I think probably some of the guests talked about this before, the division between Pheu Thai supporter and People's Party supporter, which I think are going to split even further throughout these 3 years, right? So what I'm trying to say is, even though we're seeing the increasing popularity of the People's Party after the dissolution of the party, we're also seeing Pheu Thai supporter getting more packed because they dislike the narratives given by the People's Party supporter. So because of that, I don't know, it's like becoming a polarized politics where people are becoming harder to switch sides or reconsidering parties they're loyal to anymore. So, right. So like, as much as like People's Party supporters talking about the injustice and things like that, the Pheu Thai supporters are getting annoyed of that message and becoming packed even more, which also reinforces the strength of the People's Party supporter too. It's being reflections of each other. So I think in the next 3 years, if nothing changed, we're going to see this split. But I don't know which side is bigger as of now. So I think another important player in all of this is also Prawit, which was part of the former military coalition or military government. He has an aspiration to become a prime minister of Thailand. So he's driving a lot of decisions inside the parliament, but possibly also in the constitutional court. Right. It's sad to say that it's very personal politics right now where, like Thaksin even talked during his speech in the Paragon Hall that there was some personal conflict between him and Prawit. And it looks like Prawit is also trying to fight that battle. So I don't know if he also loses his credibility already because he loses this competition this time for being prime minister. But if he's still having power to move things around, he might be also another decisive force because he's also sending a lot of people to file claims and cases against the Pheu Thai party already. So we should wait to see.
All right, that is all the time we have for this episode. PK, thanks so much for coming back on and sharing your thoughts.
You're welcome. My honor.
And Elina,
Thanks,
thank you as always. Good to have you back.
Thank you, Greg. Always good to co-host with you.
And thank you to all the listeners for tuning back in. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Southeast Asia Radio.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Southeast Asia Radio. Feel free to write us with any comments, questions, or feedback at searadio@csis.org, and we'll get back to you.
Do us a favor and subscribe and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever streaming platform you listen to us on. Tell your friends about us.
Marla Hiller is our producer, and our co-hosts today were Greg Poling and Elina Noor. My name is Lauren Mai.
And I'm Japhet and Lauren.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks for another episode of Southeast Asia Radio.